right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a phrase webinar. The title is How Are Localization Leaders Redefining Roles to Win in 2026? Would you like to also please very quickly introduce yourselves and your job title? Mercedes, let's start with you.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Mercedes Prima, and I'm the head of international experience at Notion.
Damian.
I'm Damian Fernandez. I'm an international experience optimization manager at Notion in Mercedes team.
Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Cassidy. I am Director of Global Experience and Localization at SurveyMonkey.
And Kevin.
Hi all, I'm Kevin O'Donnell. I'm a Global Growth Advisor with Global 10X.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to the agenda. Kevin, if you could pass to the next slide. Okay, so we're going to start with a presentation by Kevin, why and how are local leaders redefining roles in 2026. And then we're going to move on to our panel discussion with Mercedes, Damian, and Julia, and Kevin will also join us. And we're going to have a Q&A session, a Q&A part at the end. Feel free to start posting your questions in the Q&A box also during our conversation. We're going to pick them up at the end after our panel, and we're going to answer them live. I think we're ready to start, Kevin. If you're ready with your presentation, the floor is yours.
Brilliant. Thanks, Francesca. Hi, everybody. Really great to be here and to talk about this. My job is to set the table a little bit on this topic before we move over to the excellent panel. We're going to talk about how they're redefining localization in their own organizations, and they've got a really good story to tell. But first, I want to talk about a practical framework that you can use in your own organization for moving localization from being a reactive practice to being a more strategic growth partner within your company. Now, a lot of localization leaders that I talk to, they have these recurring problems. And what I notice is really common is the problems are quite similar from year to year to year. It's a variant of we need to localize more, we need to localize faster, we need to localize with better quality or cheaper. And while the problems contextually are different, they really have very similar solutions again and again. And it's really like a treadmill that never ends. And in many cases, you end up having to justify your work, or you have people questioning, do I really need to go through this process? Can't I bypass your team and just get my translation from ChatGPT? So it's a never-ending cycle where it seems you're just solving the same problem again and again. And the difficulty with this is because there's often misaligned metrics. So when you're focused on operational localization, you're looking at efficiency. You're looking at how many words you translate. You're looking at turnaround time, at language quality scores. And of course, these matter. These matter for telling you how good a job are you doing at managing your localization. But they are entirely disconnected from what matters to the business. They have no relevance for how much the business will grow, how many new users will come along, and how much revenue is coming. Think about what the business cares about. So your C team is looking at these metrics. They're looking at these business metrics every week in the C team, every month at the board. You know, if your CEO says, how are we doing in Brazil? They don't want to know what your error rate looks like for translations. They want to look like what your net revenue retention is, or your customer satisfaction, or your monthly active users. That's what success means to them. So the challenge for localization teams is how do you shift a primarily operational focus to be a primarily business focus? And this isn't an overnight shift. It's a gradual change to talking about things that matter to the business and making your work more relevant to what matters for senior leaders at your organization. Now, it's worth talking about the risk of not doing this and what happens if you just keep on the same path you are now. And so it's about when you might hit diminishing returns. So think about when you first introduce automation or when you onboard a brand new localization technology platform. You see huge value immediately. It's a great way standardize your processes, to do more with less, and to really move the needle faster. But there comes a point when that's enough efficiency, and any further investment you're going to make in that is actually going to have negative returns. It's going to cost you more than the ROI you will get. And it's worth everybody thinking about for your organization. Have you hit that point? Will you hit that point this year? Will it be next year? At what stage will you reach that good enough efficiency point of localization where you need to shift into something different? And some teams never don't keep an eye on this, and they keep aiming for ever more efficiency. But there's a point to which it's not worth keeping on doing that. So let's talk about why you would make this shift and why you would move beyond localization. So it's two different operating models. When you're operating as a cost center, as traditionally a lot of localization teams do, your areas of success are focused on budgetary controls. There's an expectation of finding more efficiency. Because you're looking at budgetary controls, there's a low expectation of risk, or you have to look for best practices. That leads you towards more industry off-the-shelf solutions. And what this leads you to is a situation where it's easier to outsource you. You end up in a more of a homogenous type of localization situation where localization from one company to the other doesn't look very different. It's almost become a black box. And think about what happens if you're a growth driver. So your measures of success look more like what they look like to a marketing or product team. It's around revenue, growth, user experience. There's an expectation that you're going to have to take risks, but there's a much higher reward for you personally, for your career, and for your company. You have to experiment. You can't execute growth activity by reading it from a book. You have to figure out what works for your company and frankly, what works from each market, because the solution will be different. And these contextual solutions are where the interesting work is. It's where you can bring your insights and your experience and expertise from localization and from understanding the different needs around different markets and bring them to bear. And of course, this is really hard to outsource. But more than that, it's interesting work. It's better for your team, for their career prospects, and you have a better voice. So I think the reasons are compelling. The question is, how do you get there and what does that look like? Now, when you do make this shift, it's about taking a seat at the table. And a lot of localization teams feel they don't currently have a seat at the table. They're either ignored or they're talked too late in the cycle. And so when you do take a seat at the table, you're making that shift from firefighting requests to actually shaping strategy. You're going from retrofitting international experiences to actually building them global first in marketing teams, in product, in engineering teams. And then you're going from serving stakeholder requests every day to thinking about how you can partner with them from day one and aligning on what matters for your company. So I'm going to talk through 3 steps that you can take that will help you consider making this change and what that change might look like for you. We'll talk about rebranding your team, about telling your story because you need to communicate in words that will resonate with your business. And we'll talk about an interesting exercise you might do, hosting a workshop that can really align where you're going with your stakeholders. So the first one about rebranding your team and your identity, here's a framework of how you can think about it. If you're aligned with product and engineering, your focus is most likely going to be around internationalization or product design or international product management. These are very natural areas where you can add a lot of value, and they are a nice adjacency to your localization work already. You probably do a little bit of this, but there's more of this you can focus on, or there might be distinct roles you would set up within your team. Your business impact is going to be different. So the metrics that matter to you, if you're aligned with product and engineering, should be the very same metrics that your product and engineering leaders care about. It should be time to market, active users, net promoter score, engagement, the metrics that they are tracking every single month anyway. And then what is a team name? Well, it could be any of these. It could be something around product engineering, global product development. It would be something to signify a change of focus. Even if that change of focus begins with just a 5 or 10% difference, you are signaling a change of direction rather than simply localization first, which is how a lot of teams begin their work. If you're aligned with growth or marketing teams, your focus is more likely going to be in the direction of go-to-market adaptation, hyperlocalization, local content, and campaigns. These are areas where your expertise can make a huge difference, where you can actually naturally lean in to the existing work of growth teams and marketing teams and augment them and make them better and help them achieve their business impact, which should become your business impact. It's all around these metrics, around qualified leads, market share, CSAT, and so on. And what about a team name? Well, it could be international experience, like the folks at Notion have adopted. It could be global growth and strategy. Anything that indicates you're doing more than you were doing before. And the focus here is not to absorb more work. It's about to shift your focus and to do work differently. Now, for me, the key takeaway of this slide is the business impact. So the team name ultimately only matters if you're going to change how you operate. Okay, team name is good for narrative and good for a signifier, but you need to look at these metrics and decide which of these, pick 2 or 3, are going to be most important for our team and how we operate. And these need to be the biggest change you make when you think about this rebrand. Let's talk about a storytelling template. We could spend the whole webinar on storytelling, but this is going to be just a few minutes instead. And getting the story right really matters, particularly when you tell it with a business impact context. So we'll start with setting the stage. Okay, and here's an example. You might find that your Japanese marketing leads are lagging compared to the leads in Germany and France. So you're telling a story about a real world problem that you're noticing. Okay, the challenge here is that you believe there's a lack of trust in the website design. Maybe it feels too US centric and it hasn't really been adapted effectively for Japan. Okay, so you have a choice. Okay, this is where you're showing your strategic thinking. You're thinking, well, we could do more search ads, but that's not really going to help us here. We could open up new marketing channels. Again, that's probably not going to be the key fix. Maybe you've identified we'll work with a local strategist on improving the content and the choices we make in our web page design. So you try that out, okay, and then you have a resolution to share. Okay, the outcome here is bounce rates went down, maybe webinar attendance improved, and qualified leads improved. Okay, and what is your takeaway? The lesson here is that authenticity, hyperlocalization will drive conversion. Now, by telling this very simple story, it takes an experiment you might have run, but build a story and a narrative around it so that you can share this with your stakeholders, share it with your leadership, and then use this as a template for your next initiative, your next experiment. You might take this lesson and say, we're going to roll this out in our next 5 markets because we've shown what works and what matters, and we're going to apply this. So this is one simple example, but you can take the same structure of a template and apply that to anything you do when you're aiming to link the work you have in mind with what matters for business impact. Let's now look at the customer journey and a workshop that I think is a really nice thing to do. I've run these several times and they're always really illuminating. What we have across the top here are the various steps of the typical customer journey for nearly any company. Okay, whether you're B2C or B2B, you can map most of the activities across these different steps. And what's really nice to do is to assemble a group of your stakeholders, ideally from different functions. Take 2 hours in a room together or virtual if you can't get them in a room, and map it out on a whiteboard or on a Figma board. Okay, you're going to look at every single step in the journey here, and you're going to ask the question for every step. What moves the customer forward? What matters most in this step? What friction exists for the international customer? And how can we improve the experience? And as you move from awareness, evaluation, decision, deployment, adoption, and expansion, you'll see areas where there probably is friction. Maybe your pricing page for Mexico is showing US dollars. Well, that's a point of friction. And if you're in the room looking at that with your stakeholders, they're going to see it immediately. What happens then is you're building empathy. Instead of giving them a list of bugs to fix and say, oh, you haven't fixed our pricing page yet, you're actually walking it through them from the lens of the customer. And so by rooting this discussion in what matters most, the customer that everybody cares about in the company, you're really getting them to see firsthand what matters and giving them a voice in how to fix it and how to prioritize that. It's a really nice activity to do, and it's a good way to shift out of the give and take of requester or service provider. So 3 things that I'm going to leave you with, 3 things you can do here. First, I would encourage you to reframe your role. Okay, you can rebrand your team, but really reframing your role is the main point here. Okay, you can be the international architect for your stakeholder success. Engage upstream and uncover the customer value. Consider something like that workshop and looking to shift earlier and towards the more long-term focus. And then your focus needs to be around solutions that unlock growth, experiences, and personalization. And that starts with identifying the metrics that are relevant for you in where you sit in the company, and then building the localization work around those metrics and in that direction to make that shift. And with that, I'll hand it back to Francesca.
Thank you, Kevin. This is a super interesting presentation, and thanks for sharing your insights and your experience since you've gone through this before us. I really like, the ideas that you shared, and especially I was thinking about the workshop idea. We don't run enough workshops in localization. We're not used to thinking like that. And it's interesting to, sit with other teams and discuss localization from a different perspective. So thanks a lot for sharing that. We're going to move on to the panel, and we have a few questions for Mercedes, Damian, and Julia. So the first one, to get us a bit warmed up, just very quickly, if you want to share your thoughts about what does localization mean for your organization today, and how is that different from a few years ago? Mercedes, would you like to get us started?
Sure. Hi, I have been at Notion for about 1.5 years. And so we rebranded from localization to international experience about 10 months into my time here. So it's been, a little bit more than half a year that we've been international experience. I'll talk more about this in a little bit, but the big change, and I think it really echoes what Kevin just talked about, but moving from being really operationally heavy and then focusing just on translation to something now that is much more strategic, where we're covering a lot more ground in terms of upstream influence and growth and those higher level company metrics.
Thank you, Mercedes. Julia, same question for you.
Yeah, so I've been with SurveyMonkey for just under 5 years now, and we rebranded ourselves at I think about 1.5 years into that journey, and it was definitely more a reflection of the work we had already been doing, and it was kind of making it official, really. So what I would say has been changing for us, particularly at SurveyMonkey, is that we are getting more and more involved in working with other teams on shaping and getting ready features that are like multilingual features inside the product. Especially, usually these are AI powered nowadays, but it becomes more complicated to prepare these, launch these than it used to be. So our role has definitely evolved beyond kind of the text-based aspect of the user experience in the product. So that's one thing that I have really noticed shifting over the last while.
And definitely less siloed, because we know as localization, we've been often very separate from other parts of the organization. Damian, I appreciate that you're part of the same team as Mercedes. Do you want to add anything to this question?
Yeah, well, in my case, I joined Notion a little bit over half a year ago, and I already joined the team when it had been rebranded to International Experience. So, and I joined to build the quality program. So in my case, like nothing has changed for quality, but it's been, building the quality program from scratch giving this new strategic vision of the international experience team, and that's why we rebranded quality to optimization in Notion. I can talk a little bit more about this later.
Yeah, we're gonna go deeper into that. Let's stay with Notion. I have a couple of questions for Mercedes. So we're talking about Notion intentionally moving from localization to international experience. So what motivated that change, and what challenges or limitations were you experiencing with the previous frame?
Yeah, of course. So like I said, started at Notion about a year and a half ago. And so when I started, I took probably a solid like 6 months to really observe what was our localization situation, how early were we involved, what was our level of influence, what did our relationships look like with stakeholders, and just sort of like taking stock and observing of where we were and where we were sitting. What my observations were was that we were really respected for what we did. People loved working with us. We had really good feedback from stakeholders and really good relationships. But everything was just really operationally heavy. We were only focused on translation. And then it just felt like just this localization, like project management, just like ops situation. I had come from much bigger companies where the programs were a lot more mature, and I had done, really dialed in work, like have traveled internationally to do user research on like tone framework. So like very specific strategic work. And I really wanted us to get to that place. So I think just echoing a little bit what Kevin said, I think like the first important thing is just rebranding and like renaming yourself. And the reason we did this is like, we all love localization, but it's a little confusing and it's a little niche. And so it's kind of like dress for the job you want, not the job you have. And so we were like international experience, like we're just like kind of put this out into the world. I'll say that I like am pretty lucky that I didn't really face any internal challenges. Like leadership, my manager were like beyond super supportive, which is obviously really helpful. And like I know that that's like an upward challenge that other people might face. And then I think in addition to the rebrand, again, echoing what Kevin said, it's really about like doing the work that you want to be doing. And so in my observations of like where we were and where we needed to be, just like observed that we just needed to free up a lot of time, mental energy for people on my team to actually be able to have this like higher level strategic thinking. Like you can't do that if you're just pushing tickets all day. And so like really taking the time to think about like where are our ops taking too much time? What can we do to like save that time that we can spend elsewhere? I think a really big part of this was like, we had a lot of on-site contractors. We moved everything to an LSP model. We're just like a really small team, and we just didn't have the ability to just manage that at that scale. Now we're in 21 languages. And so streamlining ops is like a really big part of it. And to help you move further upstream, I'd say we're in a pretty good spot now. I think we're definitely not like exactly where I want us to be. It's always a work in progress. I think we're probably like half and half. And I think by the end of the year, I would like to get us to like 75% doing strategic work. But yeah, I think my takeaway is like the rebrand doesn't do too much if you're not actually like working towards this North Star of like unburdening yourself from your ops situation and like moving yourself forward to where you want to be.
Yeah. It does take a fair bit of courage to, when you take over a localization program, just sit and observe instead of just going into autopilot and do the things that are expected from you. So in practical terms, after you reframed the program and you did the rebranding, what changed in terms of visibility, collaboration, involvement in business decisions? Can you share any insights about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think now we are still, I mean, obviously we still translate, we still localize, like that's still a lot of the bread and butter of what we do. But I really still see us working towards this like more strategic North Star. I think obviously a lot of this is changing, especially with like the AI situation that we're all experiencing right now. And so I think like this like North Star of like where your strategic, like where you want to go, it can change. And I think like when I first started at Notion, I was really like hot on doing more user research and like, getting more growth insights and like looking for, vendors that could support that. And then like AI just, I think, turned everything on its head. And then we really had to pivot and I think recognize that like the way that we can have more strategic influences in the AI space, and a lot of the product and engineering teams that are working with LLMs right now are like, it's really focused on English. They're really only testing and thinking about quality in English. And so there was a really big opportunity for us to run with that AI space. And so now we're doing a lot of work in the quality evaluation space with LLMs and AI output. especially in like the product space that Notion plays in. We have audio transcription, which like there's a huge quality component there. We have agentic AI. We have translations of user-generated content using LLMs. And so we've really been able to carve out a really awesome niche space for ourselves there in AI quality evaluation and working with our AI teams. I'd say we're also just a lot more visible in launches. I think between now and when I started, there's just been a huge shift in the way people think about us and the way people talk about us. And then I think we're now seeing like the proactive stuff come to us. And now, I think Damian will talk about this in a second. I think his Wi-Fi is better than mine, but we are seeing like proactive A/B testing come into us now. And so I think it's about like my takeaway is like doing the work that you think your team should be doing for a long time and pushing on that. And then eventually that good work will come to you proactively. And we're just seeing this return on investment like a year and a half later. So it does take a lot of persistence to like push and do the work that you want to be doing, but eventually it does flow to you organically.
Thank you. Thanks, Mercedes, for sharing. Mercedes mentioned several times, the keyword quality, which is a great segue for our second part of the panel with Damian. So Damian, your role evolved from language QA to international experience optimization manager. What does optimization mean in your work today, and how has that changed how others engage with you?
Yeah, so we chose optimization firstly because for the way we work, quality management tends to be more associated with like sort of rigid frameworks and exhaustive metrics that sometimes don't say much to the business, or even there is this binary idea of good quality versus bad quality. So while those frameworks are still important for certain aspects of quality management and they are in place in certain aspects for our team, they do not tell the full story for us, and they're for sure not always the most meaningful way to think about the impact of localization and quality from a business perspective. So yeah, instead of asking like, is this good quality or bad quality, like the way we think with optimization is, where does quality matter most right now, and how do we allocate the appropriate efforts to maximize the user experience there? So we are factoring things like I don't know, market maturity, user volume, content criticality, and this all translates into the fact that some markets will need a certain level of quality to deliver a solid experience. Others will justify a deeper investment or different review models. So that's what made the scope of optimization of this rebrand go beyond linguistic quality or QA into I don't know, problem solving at the systems level, with prioritization, with scaling, and always, as Mercedes was saying, aligning with product and business goals, right? So it's we want to design the conditions that will produce the right outcomes. And because we named quality optimization shortly after I joined, the role is not perceived differently. So I think it was already clear that the scope of our work already went beyond the most classical approach of localization. So the rebrand was a very natural way to reflect the reality that I joined.
I must admit, it's refreshing to think about localization quality in different terms, not that rigid, not just pass fail. Even as localization, I was not interested in that kind of data until like a couple of years ago. So I'm glad to see that we're advancing a lot in how we look at quality. So can we go a bit more deeper in how you define and measure success when the goal goes beyond just the pass fail quality metrics?
Yeah, so I think like when, as you said, like when we go beyond pass or fail, it's much more about context. So it will really depend a lot on, of course, the type of project, the stakeholder that we're working with, the business priorities at the moment. So the first step I would say for success is obviously alignment. So understanding what success means for the team that we're supporting, rather than defining it purely from a localization perspective. So in practice, what we are increasingly measuring for success is, well, Mercedes, for instance, was saying earlier that we have started partnering with to do A/B testing on product copy. So success there is measured through metrics like conversion or uplift. But also those experiments, apart from telling us which variant will perform better, they can also give us concrete insights on quality and the real impact of localization approaches. So like if a specific language consistently underperforms or overperforms in an experiment, we can gather data there about certain localization approaches that affect user behavior, for instance. Success in other areas or other surfaces like marketing and communication. So we will be aligning there with metrics like email open rates or click-throughs, engagement on social media, even on LinkedIn posts. So yes, I was saying it's evaluating it through whether localized content is helping our stakeholders achieve their goals. And something that we are also doing, Mercedes was talking about this earlier as well, is AI exploration, innovation for workflows and quality. So yeah, I would say going beyond pass and fail, as you asked, and thinking more about if we are improving the outcomes continuously. Are we improving the user experience? Are the workflows smoother? Are we having fewer escalations? Are we using efforts across markets more in a more smart way? That's what eventually will allow us to support our stakeholders in a way that is scalable for them and for the product and for the business.
Yes. Thank you. This was very valuable. And my personal takeaway is something you mentioned earlier. Your success metrics are your partners' success metrics. So we're like going beyond the just localization success, because that for itself doesn't mean a lot if it's not connected to your partners in the organization. So that was a deep dive into the Notion processes. Now we're moving on to SurveyMonkey, and I have a couple of questions for Julia. So the first question, your role combines global experience and localization. So how did that dual mandate come about, and what does it allow you to influence that a traditional role might not allow you to?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, I joined SurveyMonkey 5 years ago. At that time, I noticed really quickly that the mandate of the team was already broader than what I was used to in previous roles. That, for example, there's not an international team in place that, serves as stakeholders that we have to keep happy and build a good relationship with. So I realized very quickly, well, all that responsibility sits with my team, and we have to own that, and we have to make sure that we do that well, and we show up to our customers really well. I got really excited about that because I had already in previous roles been drifting towards caring about the why. What does, how do we influence what the customer experiences, and also how do we influence and drive business success? So that was a very natural place for me. So I kept the localization piece when I advocated to change our name and broaden the remit. I kept the name because I didn't want to lose that kind of recognizability factor within the company. I wanted to have both. I wanted to look at it as an expansion of the remit rather than a complete shift, because I do think we need both. But at the same time, I totally agree with what Mercedes was saying, because it's all about that the ability to shape the customer experience and to go deeper and to understand our customers really better. And that's been a journey for us. We are still carving out time in the team to make that happen, to allow us to get more data savvy, understand the systems better, like Amplitude or Tableau or things like that, to really get an understanding of what are our users doing, what do they do differently compared to our US users, and how can we learn from that and then experiment with that. Yeah, we've had some successful experiments as well where we were we might just some small changes, honestly, removed some US centricity from our high converting, areas in our experience. And we had an amazing success of a 70% increase in signups from just doing that. That's not even hyper localizing for specific markets yet. That's just taking away the stuff that felt jarring or didn't really resonate with the audiences outside of the US. And we're currently working on going deeper into our top markets of, making it customized for those markets rather than just kind of a one size fits all. But already the one size fits all had such an impact. And it's those kind of successes that you can then build on to make a case for investing into more experimentation as well. So it's been a really interesting journey for us.
Yeah, thank you. That's impressive. And so on this note, from your perspective, so where does localization or global experience create the most value across the organization? And where do you still see challenges or misconceptions?
So the most value, I guess, is that dual role that I already kind of alluded to. On the one hand, we're a very small team. We need to be able to do things efficiently. It's something that goes without saying. It's something that we focus on as a team, but that's not how we position ourselves to leadership. It's how we ensure that we have the time to focus on the things the business and our partner teams care about. But it still needs to be there. Otherwise, we don't have time to, expand our role. So I would say it's on the one hand, doing that really well, as in, having a high maturity in the way we localize. But on the other hand, it's that really that customer obsession that we have, where we just always focus on that and align with other teams on that. In SurveyMonkey, we're very lucky because we don't have kind of competing teams who also think they own that. Nobody else really owns that part, so it's all ours for the taking. But still, it doesn't matter. I've been in other teams before where we just really had to partner very closely with the teams that own that or that shape that international experience and make sure that we were right there with them to empower us together to, make that experience better.
Thank you. Before we move on, I also have a couple of questions for Kevin. I wanted to share just for 1 minute the story about why I'm the only one in this session with the localization director title, and why we didn't change it. So Frizz is probably at a different stage of its growth and its development, and our localization program is quite new. It's 3 years old, and we were very privileged to have C-suite support from day one. So we are not at the stage where we need to rebrand localization to maybe get more attention or to focus on different things. We're very much focusing on localization and from inside marketing, because localization reports into marketing. We're able to have a great relationship with the broader marketing team, with the engineering team, with the product team. So we discussed, should we change the role, and we decided to keep it as it is. So Kevin, before we move on to the Q&A session, I want to hear about your perspective as a global growth advisor. So what patterns do you see when localization teams successfully reframe their role, and what holds them back, if anything holds them back? What have you observed?
Yeah, the key patterns I see is that localization teams that have made this shift typically lead with empathy for stakeholders' problems and priorities. So they zoom out and they don't have a pattern of accepting the work that shows up for them every day They rather look at the bigger picture and try work earlier in the cycle to see for my key stakeholder or key stakeholders, what matters for them? What are their key needs and their business problems? And how can I bring localization along to help solve that in a different way rather than just servicing the feature requirements and requests that come along? It's thinking about it differently and zooming out. It also works towards business success metrics, like everybody's been talking about already today. It's the same metrics that your partners work on in the business. It's not, it shouldn't be anything different. They're not reinventing the wheel. They're all looking at the same North Star goals that the business cares about. That's a fundamental shift for a lot of localization leaders, but it is transformative when you can make that happen. I would also say when you start making this shift, you tend to spend more time interfacing and influencing senior leaders and slightly less time on the operations. You have to be out there. You have to be liaising with other senior peers and beating the drum for the international user and talking about why it's important and what more can be done there. You need to really, fly the flag for international a lot more. You asked what would hold them back. I would say getting stuck on improving operational efficiency, like I talked about earlier. I think that's where teams can get stuck. Now, it does matter. You can't embark on this strategic work if you're still doing manual handoffs and manual error checking every day. You need to get into a good state of efficiency for your localization operations to begin with. But you can't get stuck there. You need to have a roadmap of where is good enough, and then how do we move on from there, and how do we make a bigger impact?
So, and what advice would you give to localization leaders who are starting this shift and are not able to do like a major reorg? What's one practical step they could take in the next 90 days?
Honestly, the one thing I've seen work in practice time and again is that customer journey workshop that I mentioned, because it doesn't take a lot of preparation, but it can really deliver a lot of empathy and connection with your stakeholders in a very low stakes environment. You're all talking about the customer journey for the international user. There's no blame to go around. You're all looking at it collectively. You're not pointing the finger or showing up with a list of 20 defects or bugs to be fixed. You're looking at it together and you're deciding, what do we think about this? How can we improve the journey for our international customers? And your stakeholders will care just as much as you when they see it with you together. And that's a really nice way of shifting the focus on, well, maybe we don't need to localize everything we were planning to do this quarter. Maybe we should make some improvements fundamentally to what matters to our customers. That's a really nice way to start.
Yeah, I like this focus on empathy. I think as localization, for many years, we've told ourselves the story that nobody cares about localization. We're at the end of the journey. People seems to be against us. We very rarely have looked at what our behavior is towards other teams. So yeah, I really like this focus. Just one last quick question for whoever wants to answer it before we go into the Q&A part. So looking ahead at 2026, what capability or mindset will be most critical for localization leaders to stay relevant and influential, aside from empathy? Who wants to take it?
I can give it a go. Yeah. So I think we need to stay really closely connected with our cross-functional partners in the business, focus on the business goals. And that hasn't changed that much, really, So I think the end goal that we are aiming for, it hasn't changed. Mercedes, I liked how you called it a North Star, right? That's just, it hasn't really changed. It's how we get there has changed. We need to make sure not to get too caught up in keeping up with all the little innovations that are out there right now, and just focus on where we want to get to. So stay grounded in that and selectively pick where we put our efforts, where we test and try out new technologies, and then review and adjust regularly, but not drown in that part. Just think about where we're going. I think that's really important. Our roles in the company are broadening. I already mentioned that a little bit. And we have opportunities to work with other teams, support them more, and to really show our expertise that goes beyond translating words. Data is power, and we have lots of data in localization team, lots of clean data and aligned data, and that's super valuable to other teams. So I think we just really need to show what we have to offer and not hide behind those operational busy activities.
Yeah, try not to get overwhelmed. Mercedes, Damian, any last few words before the Q&A?
Yeah, I would add a little bit too to just like kind of take yourself out of the classic localization box. I think like over the decade or so I've been working in localization, I think I've just seen a lot of like localization best practices and like these are the steps we must take. And like sometimes you just gotta not do that. I think like another, you know, like working with vendors, for example, that like can support whatever, you know, that are very flexible and that can also think out of the box with you. But like, I think, you know, going back to this A/B testing piece, like we're doing it in a file format that like probably isn't the most ideal way to do it. But like, I would rather A/B test than like stick to the rules and like stick to the right process. And so eventually that process will like catch up because like we're doing new stuff and like, you know, we'll figure that out. But I think start with like saying yes instead of no, even if the teams are coming to you with like an Excel sheet, you know, just do it anyway. Take a risk.
Exactly. Yeah. Damian?
Yeah, I would add taking into account that like the AI hype, but it's real, as in now any team has the autonomy to create multilingual content instantly. So we have to be strategic thinkers and also have technological fluency, and we have to make these teams see that we are the people best equipped to design the right workflows, to connect language decisions with business outcomes. So yeah, I would say it's a lot of constant adaptation with experimentation, like Mercedes was saying, and testing hybrid models, making decisions with the user experience in mind, and that's, I guess, how localization will still be embedded in decision making.
Thank you, Damian and Mercedes, Julia, and Kevin for this great discussion. We have quite a few questions. I'll take them in order. So for Notion, this is a question for Notion. As teams take on a broader international experience mandate, how important is it to have the right technology and partners in place? And what do you look for when you choose them?
It is extremely, extremely important to have the right partners in place because they're just an extension of your program, and especially because you know we're small teams. I think most of us are pretty lean teams. We rely on them to like again be an extension of our program and like be an extension of our strategy and our thinking as well. And so it's 100% necessary to have really good partners. I think we've chosen really great ones. I think it's just about seeing what they're offering and how up they are on the latest technology, including AI, and then just making and also you need to like vibe with them. Like you have to get along with your vendors and have like a, you know, sort of, I think be on a similar like cultural wavelength too.
Yes. Second question. So the tendency towards outsourcing is one of the aspects of the cost center thinking. How do you guys on the call approach this in your rebranding? You promote a hybrid approach with some internal language leads, or do you only have PMs and outsource everything else?
I can answer, and I would echo what Mercedes already mentioned as for the answer of the first question. We have an outsourcing model, and that is very intentional, to be honest. But it is, I like to talk about it as I want to have my cake and eat it, because while we have that, I want to have a really close relationship with our partners, and make sure that they are really an extension of the team and that they have very clear responsibilities that go way beyond, transforming content from one language to another. It's really, we have these kind of owners, and they are our go-to people, the final gatekeepers of the language quality, and I shouldn't even say that, I should say the voice of SurveyMonkey in their language, and they make those decisions for us. So it's vendor-based, but it's supposed to be all that you would get from an internal, but it's not a full-time, they're not full-time roles, and that's why I'm going for this model.
I think we will also come like a long way from the old way of dealing with partners and vendors, where everything was very like caged, and we didn't used to share a lot of information with them for fear that they would disclose it in a weird way. We're really working as partners now, which is great. Next
Sorry,
question.
I wanna just
Yeah.
like add one thing really quickly too. I get that point that like outsourcing kind of puts you in this cost center model. I would challenge that a little bit, because it's like, then what are you doing with the extra time and money? And I think if you're using that extra time and money to be strategic and experiment or like whatever else, then like I actually don't think that it's like that cost center thing. I think it is if you're thinking about it that way. But if you take that time back, then it's not.
I totally agree, Mercedes. It's the scalability factor that I just don't have up and down, right? That's the whole thing. I need to be able to move fast and agile, and I can only do that if I have a strong vendor with resources behind me, but still a dedicated team. So it's kind of that hybrid mode.
Thank you. So I think this is going to be the last question that we answer, because we have a hard stop in 2 minutes. So what the question is, what if I am localizing a product, for example, iGaming, where it's hard to show how localization impacts GGR? Obviously, it's impacting something, but it's impossible to measure how much, because the product will be used by users anyway. So how can I sell the need for a TMS, which is costly, and investment in professional translations to my stakeholders?
I can take a stab at this one.
Yeah.
So I would acknowledge it is hard sometimes to link localization to revenue of any description. I think the place to start is to look for proxy metrics that you can use. Okay, so there's a lot of things you can look at that will give you an indicative idea of how localization is affecting the customer experience. Look at support ticket volumes by language. Look at churn rates in the first 30, 90 days by market. You could look at App Store ratings and review sentiment by language and see what is the variance here. Also, benchmark the experience of the language and localization against your competitors. How effective are you? How does it compare qualitatively to others? And then in terms of the TMS investment, I would shift it from trying to demonstrate increased revenue to be around operational scalability and just professionalizing how you approach localization. So in order to shift away towards more strategic matters, you need to achieve a level of operational excellence and professionalism. And that typically starts with good platform, good TMS, good technology as a baseline. So I would look for that from a risk mitigation, operational scalability point of view as your starting point, and then tell the story with those proxy metrics.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to go through the rest of the questions. We appreciate your interest. There's a lot of them. We're going to try to answer them offline, at least the ones that are not anonymous. And maybe we need to organize another webinar on this topic, since there is still a lot to talk about. For now, I would like to thank our speakers, Mercedes, Julia, Damian, Kevin, and thank all our attendees for being with us. We hope you found this conversation valuable, and please let's stay in touch and continue to follow our webinars at Phrase. Thank you very much.